Nick Saban has one of the most extensive and successful coaching trees in all of football coaching history. It seems he always makes the right moves when it comes to his coaching staff, and going into the 2023 season, the Alabama Crimson Tide's sideline is going to look a little bit different. They lost Bill O'Brien to the NFL, and his defensive coordinator Pete Golding is headed to another SEC program. Because of that, Saban would have to make 2 new coaching hires at the 2 most important positions outside of the head coach, and in today's video, I want to discuss what it means for them to lose O'Brien and Golding, what I think of each of these 2 hires, and how this could affect the Alabama roster for 2023, and my just general thoughts on the direction of the program. But before we get started, be sure to leave a like if you want to support today's video, turn on post notifications so you never miss another college football upload. If you love college football, be sure to subscribe, and let me know what topic I can cover in my next video. Now, let's talk about Alabama's crazy coaching hires. Let's first start with the defensive side of the ball and talk about what happened to Pete Golding and the hiring of Kevin Steele. So going back in time, Pete Golding was not supposed to be a big-time coach. He played football at Delta State, and if you're like me, you haven't even heard of them. After playing safety there, he quickly went into coaching and got his first decently high job at Southern Miss in 2014 as the coach of the defensive backs. He ended up moving over to UTSA. In 2017, his Roadrunners finished 7th in yards per game, 8th in scoring defense, 2nd in first down defense, and 19th in pass efficiency defense. Because of that, Nick Saban saw this guy on the rise and hired him away to become a defensive assistant. In 2019, he was promoted to the full-time defensive coordinator role, but would struggle during the 2019 season. In 2020, he'd helped lead them to a national championship, but his time at Alabama has been interesting. About half of the fan base wanted him fired, while the other half wanted to keep giving him a chance, and after going back and forth, Golding announced he'd be leaving for Ole Miss just a couple weeks ago, and now he will look to succeed there. So when it comes to Kevin Steele, he was born in the town of Dillon, South Carolina, and went on to play with Furman back in 1976. He was actually so good that he actually transferred up a level to Tennessee, and from there he went straight into coaching with them. He got his first big break as a defensive backs coach with Tennessee in 1988, before he became the linebackers coach in 1989 for Nebraska. After that, he became the linebackers coach for the Carolina Panthers, before he took over as the head coach at Baylor. This was at a time before the Bears were any good at football, but he would continually move up, going over to Florida State, before eventually being hired to the Alabama staff for the first time. Nick Saban made him his defensive coordinator in 2007, and he would last there for 2 seasons. Then he'd take the Clemson job for 3 seasons, before he would come back to Bama again in 2013 as a director of player personnel. He stayed on staff for 1 more year before he floated around the SEC for a couple of seasons. In 2015, he was at LSU, then he was with Auburn for a couple of years, and was even the interim head coach. There were some that thought he'd be made the full-time head coach of the Tigers, but that would not end up happening. And then he would go over to Tennessee before he would take the Miami defensive coordinator job in 2022. That was a lot to run through, but now Saban will reunite with Steele for the 3rd time, as yesterday we found out he will be his new defensive coordinator. There are 2 things I can say about Steele that make this a good hire. 1, he's very familiar with Nick Saban and this program, and 2, he has been around a lot of schools. Paul Feinbaum said, quote, "I think he's a fantastic choice for a lot of reasons. He understands Nick Saban better than any assistant coach, maybe short of Kirby Smart, which says a lot. Personally, I've heard Kevin Steele's name mentioned multiple times for many head coaching gigs, and while I don't really know the X's and O's of his defense, you could argue he's been at all the biggest programs, and Nick Saban does not need a Kirby Smart 2.0 for defense, but just someone to be better than Pete Golding. I think this is a good hire, and could be the last defensive coordinator Saban ever has." Switching over to the offensive side of things, let's talk about Bill O'Brien. You guys are probably familiar with his rise, but in case you aren't, he got his first big start in the NFL before he took the Penn State job after the whole Penn State Joe Paterno situation. He ended up doing really well there, and eventually would take the head coaching job of the Houston Texans. He had an up and down tenure there, but he was ultimately plagued by a couple of dumb roster moves, which would doom him, and he would then leave for the college ranks. After Steve Sarkisian left to be the head coach at Texas, O'Brien was named the offensive coordinator for the Alabama Crimson Tide. While he was there, he got a chance to coach Bryce Young for 2 years and had star-studded players such as Brian Robinson, Jamison Williams, John Mechie, and this year, Jahmyr Gibbs. Alabama's offense was terrific in 2021, which led to Bryce Young winning the Heisman Trophy, setting multiple Alabama awards, and them getting to the national championship. Unfortunately, they lost. This year wasn't as good for them, as they lost to both Tennessee and LSU, but the offense was still not that bad. At the end of the season, O'Brien decided that he was going to leave back to the NFL and take the offensive coordinator position with the New England Patriots. Now Bama has a new guy, and he's a young hotshot in the coaching world who just over a decade ago was playing in college football. Let's talk about them hiring Tommy Rees. Going back in time, Tommy Rees was an underrated recruit coming out of Chicago, and he did a lot at Notre Dame that no one really ever expected. As a freshman, he threw for 12 touchdowns, and as a sophomore, he became the full-time starter. He threw for nearly 3,000 yards with 20 touchdowns, but struggled with turnovers. 2012 would be cut short due to injury, and then in 2013, he threw for a career-high 3,257 yards with a career-high 27 touchdowns. One thing that always plagued Rees was turnovers, but he won a lot of games, led Notre Dame to some successful seasons, and always had a bright future when it came to coaching. That is exactly what he would do. Rees would quickly fly up the coaching ladder, eventually becoming the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame, where he had a mixed bag while he was there. When it came to Nick Saban finding his next offensive coordinator, there were some sources that said he spoke to Joe Moorhead, who was the former Mississippi State coach and current Akron coach. Then there was some also rumors that he talked to Jay Grubb, who was the offensive coordinator at Washington, but he either didn't get offered or Saban didn't actually want him. When it came to O'Brien's offense, the Crimson Tide had become way too one-dimensional and were too reliant on a good quarterback to generate points. The creative play calling of guys such as Steve Sarkisian and Lane Kiffin was missing, and last year we really saw the receivers struggle, and the running game was inconsistent at best. In terms of what Rees did at Notre Dame, he helped develop Ian Book into an NFL draft pick, and he did a really good job with Jack Cohn, who was not in a friendly style of offense at Wisconsin, and he put up big-time numbers there. Last year, they did have a lot of inconsistencies at the quarterback game, but they had a good run game, and they had a very balanced attack, and Michael Mayer had a historical season. He also led the Irish to having 2 college football playoff appearances, and in 3 years as the Irish's offensive coordinator, they averaged 2.75, 2.55, and 2.53 points per drive, and that ranked in the top 40 in the FBS. In terms of what Rees is actually going to bring over to Bama, we're more than likely going to see more of a pro-style approach. In other words, there'll be a lot less empty sets and more of a traditional running game, which we are accustomed to at Bama. Now Rees will have plenty of quarterbacks to work with, which will include Jalen Milroe, Ty Simpson, Dylan Lonergan, and Eli Holstein. The best dual threat option out of those 4 is by far going to be Milroe, but many are worried about his arm. Ty Simpson probably is the best player for that system, but he has not really played much, so we don't really know what he's going to do. Bama has plenty of big-time running backs in the backfield, and I'm sure one of them will be really good next year. So what did the old Feinbaum have to say about this? He said, quote, Nick Saban wasn't looking for the next Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian, or Brian Daboll. He's looking for someone that fits his philosophy in relation to the talent that he has. Say what you want about Paul Feinbaum, but he's typically critical of everything, and with him giving praise to Saban, I also agree. In my opinion, I don't think Rees is going to have a couple of good seasons and bolt for another coaching job. I instead think he will steadily improve while he's at Alabama and get Nick Saban's program where he wants it. One of the other critiques of Rees being in this spot is that one writer said, quote, Rees is in the same spot that we've seen people like Jim McElwain, Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian, and Brian Daboll in, and these are major names, and in no way has he proven himself to be in the same league as any of them. Honestly, that'll be my biggest critique of Rees, is that he just doesn't have a lot of experience. I would have expected him to go after someone like Jeff Levy, but apparently he has a controversial past, and maybe some of the other guys would be too expensive or didn't want to go to Bama. That I don't really know. Either way, Nick Saban's the best coach in the game, and I'm more than likely going to trust his judgment on this one. And I give Kevin Steele a solid B+ for the hire, and I give Tommy Rees a B. I think he could have done better at both positions, but both will more than likely do the job, and Rees does at least have a high ceiling. But what do you guys think? If you're a Bama fan, what do you think of these hires? What are your expectations for next season, and what do you think of the new coaches? Before you go, don't forget to also let me know what topic I can do next. Leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.